In episode 133, we dive into a groundbreaking partnership that's set to reshape grassroots boxing. In November 2024, Matchroom Boxing joined forces with Empire Fighting Chance, uniting a global powerhouse with one of the UK's most impactful community organisations. Together, they're not just supporting local clubs, they're transforming them. This collaboration will expand opportunities across the UK and beyond, using boxing to improve mental health, steer young people away from crime, and genuinely change lives. I invited on Matchroom's Head of Community Development, Alex Gravel, for the second time, as well as Martin Bisp, the founder and executive director of Empire Fighting Chance, to talk about their partnership and how they support boxing clubs by adding to the incredible work they do and achieve meaningful and sustainable change in their communities. Two great blokes to have on the pod who truly believe in the cause that boxing changes lives. So here they are, Alex Gravel and Martin Bisp. Enjoy.
It was the first time ever people just expected me to win.
As a kid, I always had a dream of being a world champion as a pro.
Knocked out in the life, but again, I've never been in with anyone like Vasily Lomachenko.
I had a good journey with Dillian, and I'm not bitter. I'm not one bit.
The movie turned out to be terrific. Everybody loved it.
And the way he was explaining it, he just went really deep into some philosophies.
It became popular to turn pro early with Ricky Hatton, Jamie Moore, John Morris.
My corner when I fight now that were there back then when I didn't have nothing, they're still the same people around me.
My favourite combination was the jab, the throwaway left hook and then big right hand.
I couldn't jump up and celebrate or fall to my knees like I'd had planned in my head for all them years.
Don't forget, he's got a pair on as well, and that's stuck in my head.
So we had won a quarter of the medals that the whole country had won for the history of Olympic Games.
The optimal time to teach something again is right when they're about to forget it.
And at that point, we thought Roy's going to freeze here. We're going to be out of here in 10 minutes. People are going to be throwing ashtrays at us. And Roy just went into a speech. He went into this whole thing. He started throwing punches.
This is the Box Gathering Podcast.
And how is your fitness for all these runs, pre-show runs that you're organising, by 5Ks, half marathons, all these sort of things? How's your fitness, mate? How are you holding up?
Well, you're
not getting any younger, are you, mate?
No, I'm all right at 5K. I can sort of get round. That's the main thing. I don't actually do any running. People would think like you must run quite a lot because you do these 5Ks. I don't. The only time I ever run really is the 5Ks. But I train in the gym enough to stay fit and ready that I can do it if needs be, if required. So yeah, they're good. But they're built into something like since we first spoke at them a couple of years ago, it's grown from Eddie and a few pals into 200, 300, 400, 500 people taking over city centres all over the world. So it's turned into a bit of a movement, so to speak, pardon the pun as well. But yeah, it's quite cool.
Look at that, ALG, fight ready, interview ready all the time. He's got his trainers on. Martin, what about you, mate? There you go, espresso. You're keeping people. You're keeping all the coffee businesses in business, no doubt. And I bet the rest of Matchroom are as well.
Definitely.
Literally got half a share in Colombia. Yeah, I probably won't go down that line too much. Anyway, Martin, are you run ready at the moment, mate? Do you throw on the old trainers and go with the boxers sometimes?
No, to be honest, I had a lifetime of running. You got to that point when I just don't enjoy it anymore. Yeah. So as you get older, you start switching up your training. I think still hit the bags. I still quite like that. But the kind of run stuff, I sit there and I just think, oh, I've had a lifetime of this. I can't be bothered anymore. So I don't do much running.
Okay, I certainly won't clip that bit up later. So don't worry about that. Do you know what? I won't clip this bit either. I can't even hit a bag now without getting bored. I can hit a bag for 5 seconds and I'm bored.
Yeah.
But you get these pros, these ex-pros, and they're in their 50s, 60s, world champions, all that, and they're still doing 10 rounds on a bag every day. I'm like, I can't hit it without. I'm just bored. It's quite strange how some people have it just literally in their blood and some people filter it out of their blood very, very quickly. And I think I'm the sort of latter.
Yeah, I feel like about the running. I just sit there and think, why do I want to do this?
I think that before every fight day 5K.
Yeah, I understand.
3 miserable sods on a podcast. Advocating for fitness and health. So I think what we'll do, we'll go into talk a bit more about how you guys have built the relationship together. But before we do that, ALG, I spoke to you last week, and I kind of like to put a pin in the map. Since you started, and in our last episode, we talked about how you got your job with Matchroom and the impact that you wanted to make. How long have you been with Matchroom now? 3 years?
It's approaching 3 years. 3 years in June it'll be. So yeah, not far off 3 years.
Yikes, almost done an Olympic cycle, mate. So 3 years in June. So from when you started and what you said to Eddie and what you said to Frank about what you want to do, how sort of happy are you with the progress that you're making so far?
So there's two ways. I'm really happy with a lot of the stuff that we've done. We've achieved some awesome stuff. I think we are changing perceptions of the sport. I think we're making a real difference, but I'm one of these people that's never happy as well. I'm always like, we're doing great stuff, but we can always be doing more and we can always be doing things better. So quite often we'll do like a Matchroom in the community event, some of these big festival type of things we'll do, and people are like, that was amazing. And I'm always like, yeah, it was, but like I'm only ever focusing on the things that I think I could make better. So I'm really pleased with where we're at, but I do think there's a lot more that we could be doing as well. And I think that the way to unlock that is to work with partners, is to increase capacity, is to just be able to do more. And obviously that is where people like Martin and Empire Fighting Chance and our other partners at Street Games and some of the other charities that we've been working with recently really come in to make a difference. I think where there's those additional layers of support, of kind of context and everything that sort of underpins what we do, that's what's ultimately going to make a difference. Working for Matchroom and doing what I do and promoting the fighters around the fights and promoting the benefits of community boxing is one thing, but when you can work with partners and you can kind of amplify that message, and it's strength in numbers ultimately. So I think we're doing a good job, but we can definitely be doing more.
So unrelenting, relentless, isn't it?
Relentless is
relentless. That is
the title of Eddie's autobiography.
Look at that. So the beautiful segue into Martin there. One, LG does this lovely, and he's also pitched a book that Eddie wrote a couple of years ago. It's just it is relentless.
I've obviously been picking tips and tricks up off him.
It's like a tenner in your back pocket for the book. Yeah. So Martin's Empire Fighting Chance. Firstly, tell us a little bit more about your background in boxing and then how this has come to be.
Yeah, so I boxed as a kid, and then, to be honest, my wife, 17, 18, I'd had enough and I wanted to go out and drink and do all the other stuff. And then my wife got pregnant and I thought, well, I'm going to get fit. I went back to a commercial gym. I really hated it. Decided I was going to box again. Went back to the Empire in Bristol. Started to train. Long story short, I suffered a car crash, which gave me some real neck and shoulder damage. Didn't really do anything after that, and was persuaded by Chris Sanagar, actually. Kept saying, why don't you do a bit of coaching? Why don't you do a bit of coaching? And I did. Truthfully, I'd be here, I wouldn't be there. And then eventually, in fact, it was a young man walked through the door called Danny Roberts who went on to compete in the UFC. But he sort of said, look, I want to change my life. Can you help me? And started coaching, and like Dan kept winning. And eventually you sort of get hooked, don't you? And then I started matchmaking and running the amateur club. And that was kind of it. So that was probably about 1999. So I was involved then for 20 odd years running the club, doing the matchmaking, doing the coaching.
You've got that background as a boxer. You've done all the other jobs, the matchmaking, the coaching. You've been in all the kind of the pivotal roles to run an amateur boxing club in the community. But now with Empire Fighting Chance, we're reaching out nationally, and you've got this chap here called ALG who's works with this small little company called Matchroom. When did this come to fruition?
Well, and I won't bore you with the whole story, but it's just an accident. The problem was I used to coach on the Friday night. I could never get anybody to cover the Friday session. So I used to go leave work, sit in the gym, do the session and go home with the amateurs. And it was one Friday, we looked out the window, me and Chris's son Jamie, who ended up with my co-founder, and we just saw two kids that we vaguely knew dealing drugs in the park over the road. I keep saying it for reasons that we didn't really understand. But we were fed up with picking needles up in hindsight. We're fed up with prostitutes accosting people using the gym. We kind of went home and said, look, this has to stop. And we had a whole conversation about it's nothing to do, nobody cares. And we were like, we care. Dragged them back in the gym, did a boxing session. Didn't think anything more of it. But before they left, we went, this gym's yours, whenever you want, just come back for free. But at least if you're here, in our minds, there's somewhere safe for at least an hour. So we were like, just come back in the gym. And they came back on the Monday. There was 2, 4, 6, 8. And within something like 6 weeks, we had 50 young people coming 5 days a week to do an after schools. And it's just kind of grown from there. So the first few years, truthfully, we were just the Empire Amateur Boxing Club. I didn't know I could get grants. I didn't know we could get funding. All we cared about was working with young people in the community that for 50 years had looked after us. And whenever there was issues within like St Paul's, the gym never got touched. We were the first place, I think, the black and white used to train in a city that was racially fractured until the 90s. So that kind of legacy and community bit was always important. And truthfully, that was how it got started. We just cared about two men that we vaguely knew, and we just thought we need to do something.
Wow, that's powerful. It wasn't something like, let's go into business, or we've seen an opportunity here or a niche that we can do. It's came from a real scenario of two people that needed help
Yeah, I mean the business bit. I mean, if we'd have been, it took us so long. Like we'd be the two worst businessmen if that's what we were driven by. It was we just cared about this, and I think if I'm honest, for probably 18 months, 2 years, like schools are ringing up, and it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And even now, 19 years later, it's still really what I care about is if the next person that comes from this community walks through these doors and we don't do a very good job and we don't care and we don't make sure that they get the best experience possible, we shouldn't exist. And that bit, despite everything else that's happened in the relationship with Alex, and both through Shoebox, from England Boxing, and from Matchroom, all that stuff's fabulous. But it doesn't matter if the next person who walks through this gym doesn't have the best chance to succeed.
So why does Matchroom fit with what Martin and his team are doing from what you've just heard there?
So our relationship goes back as well. So obviously, as you know, Adam, I used to work for England Boxing. I've been a part of the gym with James in Northampton. So what makes this a very kind of authentic and the perfect fit is the fact that I've been through the program at every different level. So I've been through the club network, the mentoring network as a club. I've attended as an NGB representative for England Boxing, speaking about the work that they can do to support clubs. And now obviously with Matchroom via the foundation, we're funding this. And it's the perfect fit because I understand it. I've seen in my own gym in Northampton the benefits of being part of this program, and as Martin and I are now funding it up as what we want it to become is a global movement. We've got 61 clubs in the UK. We have in pretty advanced talks in certain parts of the world around expansion, particularly the US, which is really exciting. And I think I'm constantly having conversations with different people all over the world now, very fortunately through work. And I think that the benefits of boxing, I mean, there's different challenges. Clubs have different challenges all over the world, but at the end of the day, boxing's the same as well. That there's similar challenges, there's similar sort of things that we can support with. So if we build this movement and we're all pulling in the same direction, we're all working together, then I think there's something really powerful that can be achieved. And I think we can, honestly, it sounds quite grand, but I think we can change the landscape of the sport. So yeah, it's the perfect fit. And I think as well, I'd never want it to be, okay, Matchroom, chuck them some money and it's funded and, you know, it's going to be sustained, whatever. Like, no, we're hands on with this. There's not a training day with the clubs that I've missed to date. Around all the shows, all the travel, everything. Like, I will be there to make sure that we are part of this program, that the clubs see, like, okay, Matchroom are in the room, Matchroom come and present to us. And they believe in what this is, so it's the perfect fit.
And Martin, you said to us before we pressed record that the sport as a whole does such a bad job at telling its story.
Yeah.
In general. So, well, firstly, tell us why you actually said that.
Well, I think it's because it's true. I mean, I look at the sport, and I suppose what's happened as well with the networking, and it's kind of worth, is that we started to get, like, boxing has multiple benefits, one of which is has a real legitimacy in communities that are often struggling. And other sports don't have. I mean, where we are now, there's no football pitch, there's no rugby pitch, but there's multiple boxing gyms within a couple of mile radius. So there's an accessibility and a credibility and authenticity about the sport, which we underplay all the time. We talk about it being great, but we don't talk about the fact that young people walk through our doors that probably won't walk through the doors of almost any other institution in the city, anywhere, any other city in the world. And we started to get such success that we were getting pressure to grow, and we had different cities ring us up and say, would you come and create Empire Fighting Chance X? Would you come and create them in, I don't know, Newcastle, Liverpool, London? And no, we always said no. We said no for two reasons. And the biggest one was, one, we believe in community. That has the answer. And secondly, there'll be boxing clubs in those communities. And the idea of us rocking up and going, listen, we're here, we're going to fix your problems, it's just a nonsense. And so in the end, the funder said, well, what if we gave you some money and we said we would train boxing clubs? Like, I think the work that boxing clubs do, sometimes unofficially, and they don't recognise it, is they're performing a social service. They're performing a situation where young people don't often access the gym, and adults, they may be up to no good, they may be struggling. Boxing gives them a sense of purpose, but beyond that, it gives them a community, it gives them a place to belong, it gives them somewhere they feel safe. And those things are actually kind of the bedrocks of how you start making social change. But we don't talk about that. The narrative of boxing, if you ask 99 people in the street, I bet, or 100 people in the street, I bet 95 of them, 99 of them, they talk about the violence, they talk about people being hit, they don't talk about community, they don't talk about safety, they don't talk about discipline. And actually, we need to start flipping a narrative and talking about how valuable boxing is to society, how much of a difference those community clubs make.
And what kind of co-projects are you guys working with together at the moment? So with your collaborations, what kind of co-projects are happening now that is going to start giving this awareness?
I think there's a few bits for us as well, and I will reiterate this. It wasn't just about the money for Matchroom, actually, because whilst the money's great, actually what it was the cultural alignment and the desire to make a change. I think it's really important to stress that the commitment they gave went well beyond here's a check. It was about amplification, it was about support, it was about providing, I suppose, the stardust, the ability to influence. So I think that those things have come alongside this kind of network that we're trying to build. I suppose there's two bits. So the recruitment, it's much easier to recruit clubs with Matchroom's branding. So we get lots of inquiries now. We've got, say, 61 so far. We're probably going to have 100 clubs by the end of next year, and then we'll see where we end up. I think they have been influential in the way that we've been able to have political conversations. The ability of Alex and me to rock up and talk about the partnership is making a difference, because nobody cares what an individual boxing club says. Nobody. They care what Matchroom say, and they actually care what 61 boxing clubs say. So I think that the combination of the two has been really powerful in opening doors, lobbying politicians, starting to talk to other cities worldwide, because they start to understand the power of a movement as opposed to the power of an individual or an individual organisation.
And Alex, Martin's mentioned cultural alignment, and I think why is that so important to Matchroom, that you guys have cultural alignment with the partners that you're working with?
I think there's loads of different ways that organisations can culturally align with this as well. It might not always be necessarily with Matchroom as an organisation. I mean, a good example recently has been the work that I've done with Ishmael Davis and a charity called Three Pillars. So if you look at Ishmael Davis's backstory, he had kids very young, at the age of 14. He grew up with a mother who was addicted to drugs, and to kind of fund some his mum's addiction, he would be out stealing on the streets and ended up going down the wrong path in life. And when he had 2 stints in prison, and during the second stint, he kind of realised that, a lot of his mates were going to prison for life and ended up in pretty grim situations. And I think he realised, I need to change my life around, and boxing's how I'm going to do it. So he started training in his prison cell with a cut-up piece of mattress for pads, and getting the hard work in, running everywhere. And everyone was like, "What do you think you're going to do?" And he's like, "I'm going to be a boxer, professional boxer." And everyone thought he was crazy. But then you look on what he's achieved. Obviously, I know he lost his last fight to Bilal Fawaz, but British and Commonwealth, former British and Commonwealth super welterweight champion, and just an incredible story. So I hooked Ish up recently with a charity called Three Pillars that work with people that are in prison, and also people soon to be released from prison. And it's all about rehabilitating them. Whether it's an alignment with us as a business, but there is a huge alignment with us as a business, but also with our fighters, with people that we're associated with as well. So I think there's loads of different ways that can work. And I actually wrote an article on the Three Pillars the other day, and it's exactly around that question, Adam, like the alignment between the organisations. I centred it around an interview that Eddie did recently, where he was talking about the role of Matchroom in basically helping people to realise their potential and achieve their dreams. And if you think of Three Pillars and what they're doing, that's exactly the same thing, but it's just with people that have maybe gone down a certain path in life. So I think the same can exist between any of our partners. And going back to the history between myself and Empire and Martin, Jamie, Aaron, all the team, I've known these guys for years. So when they came to pitch to us at Matchroom, for me, it was just the easiest decision in the world, because I've known these guys for years. And you look as well, in terms of the donation that we've made, we've funded Empire over a 3-year period with £300,000. And you look at it, just in 15 months, the current amount of money raised by boxing clubs that are part of our programme is 5.5 million plus, to be honest, as well. So it's probably a little bit more than that. So if you think in terms of like the return on that donation and the value of that and the social return on investment and everything, it's absolutely huge. So it's been really nice for me to see, like, the infographic that went out the other week explaining the work to date. You couldn't really get a more impactful partnership, to be honest. And you think we're only halfway through the initial 3-year period, and then all the stuff that me and Martin are working on in terms of that expansion in the UK and then global expansion, it's huge.
And there's a lot more conversations now at parliamentary level, isn't there, in boxing? I always seem to see that happening now. So what kind of involvement is there at that parliamentary level? Because, if things are to really move forward, you need that influence there as well. Yes, it's community, but you need that systemic change as well, don't you? And the backing of members of parliament, etc., etc. So, Martin, what kind of involvement are we getting at that level? Is that starting to really kick in now?
I think it is kicking in. The APPG and Chris Webb and Imran, and Chris Webb's been phenomenal, I think, as an advocate for boxing. And then Charlotte Leslie, you may remember before, was another big advocate in Parliament. So I think that there's actually probably a cohort of parliamentarians that really quite like the boxing. But again, it's down to boxing now to start selling itself as something that's more than just a spectacle. And I guess what we've seen, and we had a meeting with the sports minister, didn't we, Alex, just before Christmas, a small round table. And I think the conversations that we're starting to have is about how boxing is a tool for social change. And actually, if we start talking about that and start talking about the difference it can make and start talking about it can be positioned in communities, I think you start getting more traction, if I'm honest, with decision makers, because ultimately they don't necessarily probably ever fund amateur sport for the sake of it. So if you're in government, you're not going to fund, there's not just boxing, you're not going to fund cricket, swimming, water polo, whatever. You just don't do that. But when you start talking about the social return that these sports make, is when you start getting traction. So we've been having a number of meetings, a number of conversations, was presenting the case of why the network in boxing itself is good for social change. And, you know, you have to keep going back to the fact that there's a legitimacy about the sport, which means that if you want to talk about the problems that the country is seeing at the minute, boxing fits a lot of that. So when you start talking about youth violence, when you start talking about whether it's knife crime, when you start talking about mental health, and you start talking about people like working class people that probably don't access traditional services and often don't trust them, but they trust a boxing club and they feel safe in a boxing club. So actually, if you start embedding services there, you make a significant difference to a problem that the countries and every country is struggling with.
The social mobilisation part here, the social help that we can do, help physical health as well, but you touched on mental health, and obviously I know within what you do, you have Sam working with you, don't you, as a psychologist? So yes, there's the social aspects that we can help. There's physical health, that boxing is obviously well documented in terms of how that helps with physical health. So as a public service, we are helping the NHS, etc., etc. Yeah. But mental health is always in the past been something less tangible, isn't it? So how does a psychologically informed approach help with what you guys are trying to achieve? The fact that Sam's in there helping, supporting, but also educating.
Yeah, I think so. There's two bits to this, I suppose, because we also do box therapy as well. So we have qualified therapists delivering the therapy using boxing like you would art or play therapy. I guess for me, it's, and we're starting to prove this with some of our results. We don't care about the symptom, right? Empire Fighting Chance. So young people get referred to us for a whole series of reasons, and truthfully, they could be mental health. They could be resulted in urban violence, gangs, or knife carrying, but that comes from a place further back, which often results in sort of trauma and poor mental well-being. So from our point of view, how do you make a change? You don't make a change by tackling the symptom. Like taking away a knife's great, but that's not going to stop them picking up a knife tomorrow. So how do you make that change? And the way you make that change is through the kind of psychological approach of mentoring or therapeutic work, where you tackle the underlying core issue. And I suppose from our point of view, like the box champion stuff and the work we're doing with Alex, Sam, we've developed a program which is psychologically informed and evidence-based, but can be delivered by coaches, and they're trained and supported to deliver that program. So at the end of the training, they walk away with the box champions program. They walk away with access to ongoing therapeutic and psychological kind of mentoring and training. And so as a result, what we've done is you've got, I guess, community-led coaches delivering psychologically informed programs to people that walk through the door. And they're, I suppose it's implicit psychology. So we're not saying don't do this, don't do that, and that kind of explicit stuff which don't work. We're actually doing it through conversation. So the stuff is built seamlessly into the boxing, so it feels natural. So when you walk through the door, you're not being lectured or you're not being grilled. You're having a conversation with your coach that might be touching on subjects using that kind of psychological framework.
And you're not just, let's do some boxing for half an hour and let's sit down in a classroom and talk about relative models of how you can help and self-regulate. It's a natural, organic conversation that doesn't feel pushed upon them. Because I suppose a lot of boxers do come from tough backgrounds, and probably a lot of boxers also fallen out with education. They've been spoken to, talked at for the whole life, and they've never really been asked their opinion. So there's a lot of pushback against any kind of authority. So how you shape that in your boxing clubs is so important to make them feel like they have a say, and they are part of the conversation. You can't just have one person who may be naturally good at that. Actually upskilling these coaches to have this approach is important, but that must be really difficult, actually, teaching these coaches to do that, because I think we come from a sport which is naturally very militant in terms of its approach. Do this, do that. Here's my input, and I want you to respond to that. So do you have any struggles with that, or any pushback in terms of how you create these cultures within boxing gyms that are to be welcoming, that are to be a bit more organic, like I say?
Well, it's boxing. Of course we have struggles. If we have every cohort that just nodded and grinned, we'd definitely be working with the wrong clubs. There's a whole selection process. So what's quite interesting is at the beginning, truthfully, I kind of felt the first couple of cohorts, and I said this to somebody yesterday, we were almost having to convince somebody to come to Bristol at our expense for 2 days to be trained, because it's boxing, so everybody thinks there's a catch. We've now got to the point where we'll have multiple applicants for a single place. There's waiting lists to go on the training program. And what I find is there's two kind of benefits to this. One of it is because we are, and we've run amateur boxing clubs and we're part of boxing, and Jamie obviously through Amnes and his dad, they kind of get already that we're coming from a place that we do understand. We're not somebody that's been parachuted in, that's got a textbook, that's going to go, listen, we're going to talk to you about this, and this is how it's going to work. We talk about the old gym in St Paul's that we couldn't hold the ceiling up. We used to have 2 floors, and if you were skipping in the top floor, plaster used to drop on your head in the ring in the bottom floor. So we used to have all these aquapops to keep the ceiling up, and we'd have to ring the landlord again and say, look, I had visions of dying in that ring. I thought at one point the ceiling's going to come crashing down when I'm holding the pads. And it's, my obituary is killed by a lump of plaster. So we've understand that, mushrooms growing out the walls, the windows were cracked. So we've been through all this. So I think that immediately breaks stuff down. And then from our point of view, we're like, look, you are special in what you do, right? This boxing club that you represent is special. And from our point of view, we don't want to change that. We don't want to tackle it. What we're saying is there's an approach here that can make you sustainable, can help you grow the boxing club, can help you work with your community. And in absolutely worst case, bearing in mind that we're using kind of what I would say is elite sports psychology, worst case is we're going to make you boxers. We'll give you a different tool to engage with your boxers. I think that whilst we are kind of militant, and I suppose we've all done it, shouted in the corners or had the stuff organised, I think we're pretty empathetic as a crowd. And actually, somebody came to the training from New Jersey the other week, and he said to me, Martin, I just forgot how much I liked boxing people, because despite the kind of, I don't know, the bravado and the bluntness, and there are times where, like, my wife looks at me and just thinks, why on earth did you say that? And to us, it's normal. We're like, oh, I didn't realise I'd upset anybody. That's the kind of boxing mentality. Underneath it all, there's really, genuinely, in my experience, people who care so deeply about their community, so deeply about the people who walk through the gym, so deeply about the kids that they're trying to get in the gym, that actually it's not as difficult as you might think to get them to look at it in a slightly different way, because they've probably experienced what that young person's experienced, and they understand what they can do, and they understand how it made them feel. Actually, bar the first 2 cohorts that we almost had to drag here, I think it's got a lot easier and been a lot better. Alex, you've seen them all. You must probably have an opinion as to...
Definitely. And I think exactly what you're saying there, that term boxing people is something that I generally, I don't really like that term. But actually in this situation, it's perfect, because the reason it works is because there's history, there's authenticity, there's a relatability around everything that Empire do. Like, they've been in the exact situation that most of these clubs have. In fact, they've probably been in every single situation, because of obviously like the heights that they've gone on to achieve. So they started out in the gym that Martin described, and now look at what they are. They're an internationally recognised charity with a pro boxing arm, with an amateur boxing arm, with delivering everything you could possibly imagine. So I think that with people, with boxing, there's that immediately, there's this kind of like trust, because they've been there. I think in boxing you kind of need that sometimes. I think people need to understand, okay, they've been in the same situation as us and they could do it. Like Martin and Jamie will always say, if 2 idiots like us can do it, then you definitely can. And like, they're definitely not idiots, I can assure you. But they say that in the training, and you can see the club straight away thinking, do you know what? Like, and they leave after the couple of days, and you can see this sort of the pennies drops, and they're sort of like, well, do you know what? I think we probably could do it. So I think that's really, really powerful. And I think as well, just going back and listening to you guys discussing it, the thing that was really, really important to me in terms of what I wanted to achieve when I started at Matchroom was always supporting programs and supporting projects that are going to lead to clubs becoming more sustainable. When I was at England Boxing, it was all about that. It was about helping clubs with funding, but always trying to help the club to be able to do that themselves, not me write the bid, because that's not sustainable. As if when you're at England Boxing as a CSO and you're looking after 130, 150 clubs, you can't write funding applications for all of them. And the same is, it can be said now, we've got 61 clubs as part of this network. You can't be writing bids for all of them. Like, it's just, there's not enough hours in the day. So you need to teach the clubs to be able to do things for themselves, and that's how you create long-term, how the sport becomes stronger in the long term. So when we're having the discussions around the partnership and what it looked like, it was why it was the most important one for me to get over the line, because it adds capacity to what I'm able to deliver, and it also adds that whole layer of the training, the programs, the development that's going to help boxing clubs. 61 now, over 100, but in a couple of years' time, and then, as I say, we're expanding all over the world. So it's going to become a global movement, and because of that, the sport will be stronger worldwide.
And I think those are boxing clubs operate in silos, don't they? They have their own little niche. They're all very, very separate. It's like a brain. We have all these neurons, but none of them are connecting well enough And when do we connect? When you're rubbing shoulders with someone at a match, at a show, and you talk about a few little problems that you have, but you're too busy. Having these opportunities to have conversations with people, like you said, you see these penny dropping moments when they say, I can do this. We have got the skill set to do this. But then I'm assuming you're building a network there with other clubs that are going through the training who can then reach out and support. How are you getting on with this? How do we share good practice? Yeah. Because if you were struggling, I know I'm struggling, but that's a good idea. And then you build a community of getting out of those silos and sharing this good practice.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we built. One of the things that, so I suppose there's two bits. There's this kind of concept of toxic charity where you parachute in, fix something and disappear again. You make the situation worse. That's definitely what we're not doing. We're actually teaching clubs to do it themselves. So for us, the legacy, I suppose, in some ways, if Empire shut tomorrow, those clubs have still got the programs. They still know what to do. They're still becoming sustainable. So the communities are better off. And then the second bit is that I think maybe because of, and Aaron's done a fabulous job at coordinating this at our end, but the clubs share. So anything they've got that's worked, they go, oh, we've done this. Why don't you try this? We've done this. Why don't you try that? You know, whether it's creating a school or alternative provision, whether it's where they've got money for sponsorship, they're happy to share all of it. So we've ended up with a community that are kind of going, I'm struggling with this. And then they get 10 responses in the WhatsApp saying, oh, actually try this, try the other. So they're not competing with each other and they're geographically spread. And they're willing to kind of help everybody. Everybody seems to be willing to help everybody else, whether that's sharing data, whether that's sharing concepts, whether that's sharing fundraising strategies, whatever it might be. There's a kind of real openness.
Yeah, you can see that the conversations happening. Like it was a couple of weeks ago, we were down for the training. And one of the great things from a Matchroom perspective too is some of the people that are now part of the network are our ex-fighters or people that have been involved in and around Matchroom over the years. So, you know, we've got the Yaffis at Birmingham City Boxing Club. We had Kevin Mitchell on the training a couple of weeks ago, which is great to see, and supporting his next stage of his career and setting up a gym in Upminster. So, you know, you can see when you're sitting in the room and you can see people having conversations, and sometimes some of those clubs might have more recent experience of some of the issues that this other club might be going through right now. You know, that is the beauty of this network, is that everyone's experiencing different things. Everyone's kind of, you can see now in the group chat on WhatsApp, there's discussions all the time around, you know, I think there was something the other day about getting vests for boxing clubs at like a cheaper price. I think it was Charlie from Wellingborough Post that you might have seen it, Adam, actually. Yeah, I did, around people in prison designing the vest, doing this kind of stuff, and then you know, shipping and printing out a little bit cheaper and doing something that's socially good as well. You know, these kind of things, sharing good little tips and tricks that might save a few quid or might get you into school, might get you doing all this stuff. So it's incredible. And I know that the guys as well, it's never a case that, you know, Empire, I guess, would be seen as the parent organisation in this, but actually some of the clubs are now delivering even more in schools, or are bringing in more money through some of their programs than maybe even the parent organisation are in some instances. And that's not seen as like I know that the guys never look at that and go, oh, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a really, really good thing, because through the development support they've been offered, look at where they're going. They're absolutely shooting for the stars, which is what we want.
And I think the old phrase, good leaders make leaders, is such an important thing here, isn't it? Sustainability is only built on education, empowerment and things like that. So you're creating clubs that have the knowledge and understanding and confidence, support from other clubs as well, to actually go out there and deliver these evidence-based, evidence-informed practice and to make real change. And I think that's really important. I like the fact that you said, Martin, that you can have people parachute in, deliver some information and then go out on their chopper. Yeah, and it's like anything like the CPD. We've all been to CPD, haven't we? Where you come in and someone does some CPD and you go, oh, that was nice. Whatever the CPD is, it's only as good as the benefit that it has in the long term, if it makes change. And I think that's something that obviously Matchroom, you guys are really invested in this to ensure that long term change is there.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can I just pick up something, and I'm just changing pace slightly. Alex, you said you don't like the word boxing people. That just kind of pricked my interest. Why?
Because I think that the benefits of boxing can be realised by absolutely anybody. I don't think you have to be like a boxing person, or I don't think you necessarily have to have boxed to give a lot to the sport as well, which I think would be some people's definition of the sport, of what a boxing person is. I just think it's a little bit like, I'll probably get absolutely hammered for this, but I think it's just a bit of a lazy assessment sometimes. I think that there's just so much more to it. What we want to do at Matchroom and what I want to do in my role is make sure that everyone sees the benefits of boxing and that we change perceptions of what the sport is. And I think if people just refer to boxing people and that the sport is reserved for boxing people, then you're boxing it off and you're limiting the potential for growth. It's probably hard to see it without talking myself into even more trouble.
Yeah, I suppose it's what people's definition maybe of that would be. Because, yeah, what you're saying, I do see that can be very exclusive. I can't be involved in boxing because I haven't boxed, or I can't be involved in this because I haven't got that experience, or I haven't coached for long enough. And it's very much a ring fence and stay off unless you've got the experience. Well, how do you become involved in boxing and become a boxing person unless you're allowed to be involved in the sport?
Definitely. And I think there's so many, like, I know that it's the work that the guys at Empire do, a lot of the coaches that are going out and delivering in schools, I know that the way that those guys recruit, and I know a lot of the clubs as part of the network now are encouraged to recruit not boxing people with boxing experience, but just people that could be a good coach, and then the boxing comes after. And I think there's so many transferable skills that come from any form of coaching or a form of communication. I think if you go in with that kind of narrow mindset of, okay, they must have boxed, they must have done this, then you are limiting yourself to what you could possibly achieve with the program. So I don't mind it, but I just think that I don't want boxing to limit itself, and I think sometimes it's guilty of doing that.
Are we too protective of our sport sometimes, Martin? Are we too, influence from the outside, whether it be an academic influence, whether it be a government influence? Even I know a lot of clubs are very resistant even to NGB influence. Are we a little bit too ring fencey sometimes as a sport?
Yeah, probably. We're too territorial. We're very passionate about our bit, and I think you used the word before, militant. I think that's quite a good expression for boxing clubs, actually. There's a lot of militancy there. I suppose one thing that I keep thinking, and I guess the guy who said it, when he was talking about boxing, people in that room, Alex, were people that had never boxed, but were part of a boxing club. So actually, I think the sport maybe just needs to, it comes down to telling the story, doesn't it? It comes down to again, looking at who's involved, because we have people here walk through our door, and I think one, for example, Box for Me, his mum volunteered and helped out the dad runs a record management label, and he's now gone on to run record labels, but he wasn't a troubled kid. He was a kid that wanted to do something physical, and boxing happened to be something that he enjoyed. So I think for us, it's about the narrative that we tell ourselves and everybody else. And you're always going to get that kind of old school approach. Yeah, we should be broke. We should be suffering. It should only be us. Everybody else is rubbish. We're the only club that produces anything. Everybody else is this, or that, the other. We know the boxing mentality, and that can creep in. But I think with the network, what I'm seeing is there's a group of people who are really open-minded, really keen to push the kind of narrative, if you like. Boxing is a positive force, and however they tend to be involved in the sport, the fact of the matter is, it's for the benefit of others. So bear in mind, it wasn't that long ago that we couldn't have women in the gym, so it takes a while to catch up, but I think it's starting to catch up.
I think sometimes as well, just on like some of the challenges and issues that clubs face sometimes is in fact, it goes back to one of the last projects I worked on with when I was at England Boxing, was a volunteer recruitment program. And what I was really keen to do was to attract volunteers with different types of skill set into the sport. And they're not necessarily going to be your typical boxing type skill sets around maybe coaching or the type of things you might see within the gym, or certainly people would think of as the typical boxing skill sets. So I was reaching out to universities, people from other kind of professions that might be able to support things like accounts, with help with funding applications, whatever it might be. And I think that, again, what I don't ever want boxing to do is just limit itself and just think like, okay, this is how it's always been done, just keep doing it, and things are going to improve. Like that's never going to happen. So if we keep evolving and we get new people into the sport that maybe have previously had no interest in boxing at all, but if we can then convert them through whatever it takes to convert them to be a fan of the sport, and then to maybe give back in some way to the sport, that's how the sport will grow. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do. Really, when you break down what we're doing in government at the moment, that's what we're trying to do. The MPs that are part of the APPG for boxing are already converted. What we need to do is we need to convert more. We need to get more of them into an amateur boxing gym, because if they they go to an amateur boxing gym, I'm convinced if you get anyone into a boxing club, they'll leave and understand the benefits of the sport and they'll want to help. So that's a huge part. But basically, if we can get more people into gyms that don't currently understand the sport or don't have that kind of experience of the sport, then we will benefit from that, because people, I always challenge anyone to go to a gym and not see the benefits of it. It's impossible.
And without being, I was going to swear then, but I won't. Without being too insular,
feel free. You can chuck one in.
Yeah, without being too wank about it, we need to look at ourselves anyway, because like, we've trained youth organisations, and initially we were quite reluctant. We were a bit like, well, are you going to use boxing? You know, we got and then they were like, no, we could. And so now in Preston, I think there's like 13 organisations, schools, youth zones, that are using boxing to engage youth organisations, active partnerships, that are using boxing to engage people that may never have walked through the door of a boxing gym, but now they're going on to box, or they're going on to take part in the sport. So again, for us, what is boxing and what do we want it to be? And if we want it to be really narrow and it's just competitive, that's fine. But we'll get to a point where presumably we're all going to struggle for funding. We're all going to struggle to make things happen. Whereas if we start saying, well, actually boxing is a source of change and is a source for social development, and you can have amateur boxing, professional boxing, but you can also have this like boxing for good element that engages young people, then I think as a sport, that's what we should be embracing. We should be having all three levels, and we should be making sure that the sport itself is talked about, because there's lots of people who might watch a big fight, Alex. They might watch a Matchroom show, but they haven't thought about walking into the amateur boxing gym because they don't think they're going to be welcome. And one thing that we talk about, as you know, to these clubs is bring people in your networks that might enjoy boxing that haven't necessarily been involved with the amateurs, because they could be really useful, whether it's politicians, whether it's accountants, whether it's somebody who runs a business. Get them involved, bring them in. They don't have to be an official. They can just help you as a club.
Absolutely. And final few questions, guys. What would you say are your gripes? So what are those hurdles that can really prevent this sport from growing at the moment? What's the things that really piss you off at the moment that you're finding so much of a niggle that I'm sure you can jump over that hurdle, but what are the big hurdles at the moment that you really need to address, especially maybe within your partnership?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a huge hurdle, but it's really what I was just saying a second ago around changing those philosophies and mindsets of people that make decisions at the moment. So I think that we're doing a really good job of speaking to politicians, speaking to people in power about the benefits of boxing and what it can do. But there's so many more out there to convert before we're going to see change. It's that frustration around people that don't get it right now. And it's not always their fault. They might not have had the opportunity to get to a gym. So we need to make sure that they do have the opportunity to get to a gym, or to get down to a show, or to experience the sport, or meet a boxer and see that they're maybe not what they might preconceive in their mind as to what a boxer might be. So it's opportunity. We need to create more opportunity for people to see the benefits of the sport. I guess that's probably the hurdle.
But that's our fault, I think, as a sport. Yeah. Going back to my point, I think that's our problem. We don't tell stories. We don't welcome anybody.
Well, I would say, Mo, like the one thing I always say to a club, I work for a boxing promoter, right? And the only reason I work for the boxing promoter is because I didn't want to be a secret. Like I've got Barry's book at there, and one of his 10 commandments for life is don't be a secret. So many boxing clubs are a secret in their community. They don't shout about what they're doing. Why not? Like you're all doing amazing things. Don't be a secret. Promote yourself. That's always the one thing I say to them. Like you've got to do it. But sorry, Matt, to cut you off, but I just think it's so important.
Yeah, some boxing clubs are they're like speakeasies during the prohibition, and you have to have the password and knock 3 times and things like that. And where are they? Where are you in the town? Where are you? I think there is a little bit of that. So, interesting enough, I was speaking to Paul Hipperson, who leads on our outreach program for Eastbourne Boxing Club, who works with you, Martin, and he's really passionate about this. And I know that is a sloppy thing to say, "Oh, he's passionate about this," because everyone says it, but he truly is passionate about this. And he was saying that what we don't do enough at the club is testimonies. So every club's got their Instagram account, right? And TikTok, and here's a picture of them sparring it in the bags and doing press ups and all that kind of Rocky IV montage sort of stuff. But what we don't do is that just a simple little 10-second or even a little clip just to say, my name's Joe Bloggs, I come from this background. The reason I'm at this club is it does this for me. And I said, we don't do that enough, Paul. He said, we need to do that. Simple. Let's get that done. It's just a different approach with social media as well, isn't it? In terms of how you use it, show the impact it's making, and show it across the diversity that represents your boxing club, different age groups, different ethnic backgrounds, whatever it might be. Let's shout that from the treetops. But it's took me a slap in the face just to remember, why are we not doing that? But I'll put another video up of our boxers hitting the bags. tomorrow. It's
Yeah,
just a
such
little bit of
simple
a
fix.
just simple. Yeah, it is simple thing, isn't it? But we're not
Yeah.
thinking about that, and it's almost like deep rooted in me to post a picture of the boys sparring, where I can evidence the impact it's having, which is going to have, because it's just becoming grey noise if I'm just putting stuff up of a white noisy grey noise. The age I'm starting to get. But yeah, we're not doing that enough, and it's just simple little approaches like that maybe can help. What do you think? Yeah.
But it's not just social media. Invite people to your gym. That's one of the first things we did. Is everybody had especially when we started working in schools. I can't believe the number of head teachers that we would kind of go in and say, look, yeah, they'd reach out because they'd heard about us by somebody else, but they just assumed that we'd be taking the pupils they couldn't control, teaching them how to fight, and making it harder for them. And the number of times they were almost surprised that, one, we could talk, and two, that we were offering this, and we become, well, actually, no, their behaviour will improve this and will improve that. So we learned a lesson early that unless people see the environment, unless people get to know the kind of people involved, then actually you don't break through, because your social media, in some ways, you're preaching to the converted. People who follow you are interested in what you're doing because they follow boxing. So actually, how do you get beyond that? How do you get, I don't know, the big accountancy firm? How do you get the politician? How do you get the sports wear that only sells football? How do you get the mum who's struggling? Or how do you get the volunteering? The only way you do it is by opening your doors and talking to people and making, we make a point even in this gym. As I said, we've got amateurs, we've got pros, and we've got the thing. But we walk through the door and people keep commenting how friendly it is. It blows their minds that everybody will say, are you okay, when they walk into reception. If they're sat there, people will talk to them. It's that kind of busting these preconceived notions about what boxing is, getting them in the door, making them understand that the gym's a different place, getting them to talk to people, understanding the stories. That's how we move to the next level. Otherwise, we just become a smaller and smaller sport, because we're so insular, and as the word moves on, people don't approve of boxing, they don't approve of this, and we don't disabuse the notion, do we? We go, okay, yeah, you're right. We're actually, or we hanker down and go, actually, like you said, with the speakeasy, where you've got to knock 3 times and climb through the window to access a gym. That's not great for the sport. This sport's phenomenal for what it can achieve, but it needs to do it in a way that talks about it and makes it accessible, makes people understand that this is more than just what they think it is.
Yeah, the other thing as well, there was, so recently, one of the things that we've done sort of relating to the network there. So a friend of mine who's doing a PhD at Teesside University called Kyle Genner, he wrote a research paper around some of the challenges that boxing clubs are facing, and the clubs that are interviewed for that work were either clubs that we visited via Matchroom in the community events, or that are part of the Matchroom and Empire network. And one of the key findings within that, or certainly the things that stood out to me, was this concept that is called symbolic violence. So basically, it's where boxing as a sport and boxing clubs almost celebrate this sense of poverty. Like, look at us, we're really struggling, and we work with kids from deprived communities, which, like, the sport does, and that's fantastic and everything. But can't we celebrate success and clubs that are sustainable for the long term and that are doing great things? And just reframe it slightly. I think that sometimes boxing clubs are too inclined to just say, "Oh, we can't keep. We've got no heating. We've got no lights. The canvas is shot to bits. All this kind of stuff." Like, what about all the great things you're doing? Sell what you're already doing. The other things can be improved for sure, and we're working behind the scenes to hopefully get more resources into the sport to do that. But if you tell the success stories rather than sort of just pleading poverty all the time, then I think the sport would be seen probably in a bit of a different light as well. It's not necessarily. I completely understand it, because there's so many challenges out there. I've been to like hundreds and hundreds of gyms all over the world. Before Christmas, I was in Ghana, and I've seen they call them gyms, but one of the gyms was literally some bags hanging from some rafters on the overhang of a building. Like, that was their gym. So then there's different levels to the barriers that people face in accessing boxing, and I think that sometimes we're too quick to just always say that it's negative. We can flip it and be a bit more positive.
Well, my challenge would be, do you think what you do is valuable? That's what the boxing clubs should ask themselves. Am I performing a service that's valuable? Because if it is, why should I be the only person in the world that performs something that's saving lives that I don't get any recognition or payment for it? Well, I'm not sustainable. I'm paying effectively to save lives in this community for this city, and I'm making a significant difference, and it's costing me thousands of pounds. As a boxing organisations, we should look at ourselves and go, is our work valuable? If we think it is, then we should talk about it. We should make a case. We should push it. Because that's the importance we have. Cities and communities would be immeasurably poorer if a boxing club wasn't in them. And so I think it's the way we look at ourselves and have that conversation about, this is valuable. Why should this not be supported? Why should this be diminished? Why should this be pushed into a corner? What we do is valuable. It's important work. Every boxing club is performing some kind of social service. And I think if they looked at it that way, then they may understand that they need to be sustainable. They need to be looked after because the community would be worse off if they go.
Yeah, and I think, for example, England Boxing have asked every club to revisit their constitution to look at what is the reasons. I think it's also from a governance point of view, but so they understand what their lighthouse is. Why are you opening the doors? Why are you operating? And that's important, right? It's why, if you were to ask that question, deep question, why are you doing what you're doing? Almost we should be able to answer that quite easily. So the reason we're doing it is because our club is in operation because of X, Y, and Z. And that's what it says in our constitution. That's our lighthouse, and that directs how we coach, etc. But I think it's really important, Alex, that this chap has almost labelled it symbolic violence, because as soon as you said that, I went, I do that. I do that all the time. I do that. We're volunteers, we ain't got any money, we rely on it. And yes, while that's true, I don't think we should rely on this kind of woe is us and we don't get support type thing. It should be, right, okay, stop being woe is me and start being, but this is what we do. This is what we achieve. This is why we're a positive force in the community. And guess what? Here's 2 or 3 testimonies from people that's changed their lives, not just this year, but I've got that documented over several years since we've been in operation, and that shows long-term impact. So having that symbolic violence, I couldn't put my finger on what it was that kind of revert back to, oh, we don't get supported as much as we should. Having it labelled, I think, actually helps you realise, yeah, I do that, and I should be more positive rather than help us because it's negative. Does that make sense?
Such a simple way.
It's reframing, like you said.
It's just reframing things. It's if you just simply reframe it and think, actually, no, I want to promote all the great things that we're doing, rather than saying there's no heating, the roof's leaking, all this kind of stuff. It just completely changes what the sport is to those non-boxing people. Then they begin to understand, okay, this sport's actually doing loads of amazing things. People already know, like you've seen all the movies over the years where boxing's depicted in a certain way. So there's already this preconceived idea of what the sport might look like or what a boxing gym might look like, spit and sawdust, all that kind of thing. Like if we move away from that a little bit in terms of how we promote the sport and how we speak about it, I think it would be really powerful, but it's going to take a lot of people collectively to do that, and obviously that's what we're trying to achieve. I guess it's one of the things we're trying to achieve with the network that we're building. It's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, and I think it is exciting. And we did some work in Edmonton, Alberta last year, where we had 8 organisations that we trained in this methodology and supported them to deliver it. But all 8 have now just attracted 5 years federal government money. So we've kind of created an ecosystem there that's now going to be sustainable for 5 years with a partner. And the conversations we're having are exciting. I mean, nothing's done until it's done. But fingers crossed, we'll end up creating this global movement, and we'll start championing boxing everywhere and create a whole series of collective stories about how this sport can change lives.
Do you know what it is, Adam, as well? Like the amazing thing with this, how it develops, is I'm so fortunate to go to different places with, I don't do all the international shows, but I do ones where there's a particular community focus, whether it's like the community itself, the fights, the city where we're hosting the event, there's a particular something I think could work there, or if it's a fighter that we particularly has a focus on community. Or so I've been fortunate enough to go to Philadelphia 3 times. One of them was actually for a show in Atlantic City with Boots Ennis. And Boots is someone for me that's been incredible, because I think sometimes he frustrates our PR team and our comms teams, because in the build up to a big fight, these people, he got offered to go to, like, I think it was like the Met Gala and all these things, something with Jay-Z was offered to him, but he wasn't interested in that really. All he wanted to do was put on a community public workout in the middle of the hood in South Philly. So we've done some really cool stuff. We did an event, as I say, this public workout or community workout at the Ralph Brooks Court in South Philly, which was actually covered in Ring Magazine, and the title of the article was relating to how, like, this is boxing done right and boxing promotion done right, taking the fighters back to where they're from, taking it back to the heart of these communities, the people that are buying the tickets, the people that are driving this sport. So it's been really, really cool. And I think the way things are progressing in America, it's all come from me going out there on the ground, meeting people the first time and thinking, oh, hang on, okay, learning little bits about the sport and how it works in America. And then coming back with some ideas, speaking to the team, speaking to Martin, and saying, do you know what, like, I think there's a real gap in the market in America, particularly because, and it goes back to England Boxing and my days there. Obviously I used to work for the national governing body, and I go to America, and I used to be the guy at England Boxing, hands-on, working with clubs, dealing with funding applications, doing all that nitty-gritty kind of stuff. You go to America, and purely because the country's so vast, there's just no way that they can actually do that. They don't have anyone within the NGB that's working on that kind of thing. So there's a huge gap in the market for people or an organisation to support in, you know, that kind of those relationships with clubs and that support. So I saw that the first time I went there to San Francisco, actually, for Haney Prograis, and then from there conversations have progressed. I've been to Philly a few times and got to know more and more people, and it's just we realised straight away that if we're going to do this, then what better place to start than Philadelphia? You know, if people think of a fight city in America, there's a few. You think Philadelphia, Joe Frazier, Bernard Hopkins. You know, I've made the mistake of throwing the Rocky story in a few times on a few calls because people in Philly love boxing, but they're not necessarily. They don't want it to be seen as Rocky. They want it to be seen as some of the greats that they've had. So I think it's the perfect place to start. It's a city that I know Martin sees similarities with Bristol in the way that the kind of the cultural makeup of the city and things like that. So I think it's a really good place to start, and it's so exciting as to what we could do, particularly with some of the stakeholders involved. You know, Boots Ennis, people like that driving it on the ground. It's massive.
Yeah. And the community that makes these champions, so revisit that community again. It's a 360. It has to be. It can't be just the community makes a champion and that's it. There's a disconnect. Bring that back, and it makes sense in everything from doing the right thing, but also from a business point of view as well. It just makes sense.
It's a city that just gets it. Like even when last time I was out there, I did an event with Giorgio Visioli, where obviously Giorgio, like clues in the name, he's got Italian heritage. So going back to that sort of Rocky thing, the Italian American community, it's a huge community in South Philly of Italian Americans. So I took Giorgio to the Phil Italia, it's called. It's the Italian Heritage Museum. So we took him down there. We did a few sort of we actually took him to the Rocky Steps first. Then we took him there and we showed him around this museum. And there's all this old school Italian American boxing memorabilia, all this kind of stuff. And it just shows you that, like, wherever you are in the world, he's just a kid from Aldershot, and he went all the way over the other side of the world. And by the end of the week, he had a whole Italian American community pulling for him. Some very vocal fans ringside at fight night, which is quite funny to watch, to be fair. So yeah, it just shows, like, wherever you are in the world, there's always like communities at the heart of everything. You can find those relatable moments, and things like that just made it reinforced in my mind why Philly's the perfect place to start. It's just like we were talking about boxing people, but this is a boxing city for sure.
It's amazing how people get behind their people, don't you? Look at Adam Maka, Albanian community, get behind him as well. Perhaps. Thanks very much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Enjoyed the chat. And like I say, I will put in the show notes Aaron's email address for any clubs that want to get involved with Empire Fighting Chance, and indeed want to get in contact with Alex at Matchroom. Okay, chaps, have a great Wednesday. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
See you, mate. Bye-bye. Bye.